Welcome, everyone. I'm very excited to speak with you all today about using behavioral science to drive solar panel adoption. As Liz mentioned, I'm a partner at Ker-twang, and just to give you a little more sense of what we do, so we do this co-design or participatory design, human-centered design for intervention delivery and service provision. So we work with a lot of academics and government agencies, also nonprofits and for-profits. And the basic idea is that if you're sitting around a table, you have a problem. Let's say you want to get people to install residential solar. We do in-depth qualitative interviews with stakeholders. So certainly in this case, the residents of the town that you might be looking at, but other folks involved in the sort of decision-making process. And then we do some rapid prototyping to develop technologies to deliver the intervention or service. So it could be like a chatbot or an app or a WhatsApp messaging campaign. And then we go back to the stakeholders and do this sort of participatory development to figure out, exactly what's the right message medium messenger to deliver this message and technology. And then, we work with folks on piloting, onboarding, data analysis. So if science is part of your goal, great. If it's not, no problem. But if any of this is interesting to you or could be of use, please be in touch. Okay, so I'm going to divide my time roughly in half, picking up where Ken left off, talking about credibly enhancing displays. And then I'm going to zoom out a little bit to talk about a sort of more general behavioral toolkit for influencing behavior. And this work is part of a paper that we're working on now. It's going back to reviewers soon in collaboration with folks at the World Resources Institute, which y'all might be know about. Okay, so credibly enhancing displays is a maybe too wordy term, but it means pretty much literally what it says. So it's a display, so a behavior that enhances one's credibility. And this comes from a theory of cultural anthropology, evolutionary anthropology, figuring out, how do people socially learn from each other. And there's a great theory paper that we cite, but we had not, as Ken said, we had not seen any sort of empirical evidence of it, although I think we all, sort of feel that actions speak louder than words, but now we wanted to show it. And to give a sort of demonstration of how this works, I'm going to talk about mushrooms. This usually, people like this when I do it in person, we'll see if it translates online. But let's say I have two bags of mushrooms that you're looking at here. One is poisonous and one is not, but you don't know which is which. So if I just tell you the mushrooms on the left are not poisonous, I don't know if we can show of hands or whatever emoji, if you would eat the mushroom if I told you the ones on the left are not poisonous. All right, well, I can't see many people, but I've got a couple takers. Okay, cool. All right, now imagine I have that bag, and I reach in, and I eat one of the mushrooms on the left. Now, how many folks would be open to trying the mushroom from the bag that I ate? All right, more. All right, good. All right, so I think you sort of get an intuition for how this works, but just to explain in a little more detail. So we know that our talk is cheap, right? When we have no skin in the game, when there's no sort of direct consequences to us, we can say whatever we want without immediate consequences. Of course, there's reputational consequences, et cetera, but we'll suffer no danger from saying whatever. But our actions have the potential to be costly, like in this example, because if I were to eat the poisonous mushroom, obviously that would be very bad for me. So our actions speak louder than our words because they're a more reliable signal of our beliefs. That is, when you talk to people, they may say words that align with their true beliefs. They may not. But when you see them act, you know that that action is aligned with their true belief. Otherwise, it could be very costly. Okay, so going back to the Solarize Connecticut campaign that Ken mentioned, this was 58 towns in Connecticut. It was about a third of the state population, 2012 to 2015. And thanks to the U.S. Department of Energy and cooperation from so many folks, Smart Power, Connecticut Green Bank. And I will just say thank you to Ken, because this paper would not have been possible without him basically saying to me and my advisor in grad school, well, you guys are psychologists, like what can you find in this data that could be interesting? So we went about testing this creds theory. And the way that we did it, And Ken mentioned some aspects of the Solarize Connecticut campaign. It was sort of this, as he said, kitchen sink approach. There are many things that probably helped adoption, like a clear termination date, a pre-selected solar installer, discounted pricing. But the thing that we're going to focus on here are these solar ambassadors, which were sort of focal individuals in the communities in each town that organize the events that Ken talked about, like the open house and the information sessions. And so the way that we're going to test whether actions really do speak louder than words is we'll group these solar ambassadors into two groups. One group installed solar themselves through the Solarize program, and the other didn't. Pretty straightforward. So here, I'm about to show you a graph. On the x-axis are those two bins for whether the ambassador themselves installed solar through the Solarize campaign or not. And on the y-axis are the number of people in the respective towns who installed solar through Solarize. This is a box and whiskers plot just to orient you, but what the stats say and what you can tell from the green box being higher than the blue box is that many more people installed solar in the towns where the ambassador installed solar themselves. And just to give you a sense of how many, about 63% more installations in the towns where the ambassadors themselves installed solar. This is about 400 more installations. And we do some econometrics and follow-up tests to sort of show this causal effect, which I'm happy to talk about more later, but I'll just gloss over for now. And just to show that this is not something sort of particular to solar, but that it's a sort of generalizable principle. One of the follow-up studies that we did was to basically take a description of the real Solarize campaign and then just swap out the words, residential solar for some other behaviors. So like buying used consumer goods instead of new goods, like shopping, at Goodwill, buying carbon offsets for flights, wearing a face mask when you're sick with the cold or the flu. This was before COVID. I wish we'd dug into that because that would have been useful. And then finally, xeriscaping, as Ken talked about. And this is a meta-analysis, and basically what it's showing you is that in all of these cases, and in basically every case that we've tested, people are more likely to say that they would engage in a behavior if the sort of advocate for that behavior themselves does it. I think that's like, probably intuitive to all of us, but good to see some data that backs it up. Okay, so one takeaway from this is that if you're engaged in a sort of advocacy campaign, try to get advocates who themselves engage in the behavior. All right, and now moving on to the second half, the behavioral toolkit. So just to orient you to the project overall, we're casting a wide net and looking at the most impactful behavior shifts and effective interventions in the energy, transportation, and food sectors. And this is all sort of individual level behaviors. And this is, so what we're doing is combining sort of two sets of data. The first set of data looks at estimates of greenhouse gas emission reduction potential of different behavior shifts. So this would be like saying, if you installed residential solar, how many tons of carbon dioxide per person per year do you save over not installing solar? So that's one sort of type of data, and we call these the projected impact. And then the other set of data are effect sizes of behavior shift intervention studies. So this would be studies that, for example, try to get people to install residential solar, and there'd be some, effect size of the efficacy of that program. And then through a statistical technique that I developed, we sort of combine these two to say, given what we know about the efficacy of getting people to change their behavior and the potential carbon emission reduction potential, what carbon emission reduction potential can we expect from a behavior intervention study? So happy to unpack more later. I know that's throwing a lot at you at once, but I'll give you some relevant preliminary results. So here on the x-axis, so now I'm talking about that first data set. On the x-axis are the tons of carbon dioxide per person per year saved by engaging in each of the behaviors that will be listed on the y-axis. And these will just be ordered from most carbon emissions saved to least. And they'll be divided, they'll be color-coded red for the energy sector, blue for the food sector, yellow for the transportation sector, and the size of the dot will correspond to the number of estimates we have for each of these. And I'm sorry, the text is tiny, but I'll have you focus on this second dot, which is shifting your home energy to renewable sources. So the topic of conversation today, this is among the most effective sort of projected behaviors that we can do. So, good on everyone here. You are doing important and urgent work. And just as a point of comparison, I'll highlight this dot, which is about reducing home energy use. And this has gotten a lot of press, and it's been a big deal, with the O-Power studies, home energy reports. These are studies of that often have an effect, and they are good. But if we're just comparing which sorts of behaviors should we focus on, residential solar is a lot more important, I would say, than just turning your AC down. Okay, so now the behavioral toolkit. So now we're moving to the second half of the data. So there's sort of 6 groups of kinds of interventions that people tend to do in the literature. The first has to do with choice architecture. So this is how let's say a consumer or individual sort of faces a choice. And this is everything to do with like Nudge, the book, and the theory. So examples of choice architecture are framing. So like the language that you use to describe a problem. And I'll cite Ken whenever possible, not just because he's here, but because he's approximately the expert on behavioral science in residential solar. So he actually mentioned this paper before. They framed an appeal to install residential solar either in self-interested terms or in prosocial terms. And in this case, in this population, the self-interested framing worked better. So that's an example of applying choice architecture to residential solar. Incentives, of course, this is like the bread and butter economics intervention. This just has to do with manipulating the financial rewards or discounts or disincentives and fines. This, of course, is a huge topic of study in residential solar. And just to give an example, so Ken has a paper on this as well. This figure I'm just going to cite is from a different paper because maybe it's easier to say, but the finding there was that something like a $1 per watt rebate increased annual solar capacity by close to 50%. I have all these citations to share, but of course incentives are a big part of getting people to adopt solar. Social norms, which Ken talked about, have to do with and I forgot to mention that my PhD is in psychology, so this is the lens that I'm coming at it from, and we talk a lot about social norms. And the way that we talk about social norms is that it's about people's beliefs about what other people do and what other people expect people to do. So the kinds of manipulations you could do here are making people's behavior more observable, or just giving recognition. So if you sort of publicly recognize someone for doing something that everyone thinks is good, they'll be more motivated to do it. And although Ken has done a lot of work related to social norms, there's another paper that I found that quantified the effect of social norms in motivating residential solar adoption, where they basically saw that they mapped the sort of peer effects that Ken showed, but then they also surveyed folks and asked people about these 2 kinds of social norms, which are technically descriptive social norms is what people think others do, and injunctive is what people think that others expect them to do. And they found that basically the peer effect of your neighbors installing solar is sort of mediated by or explained by people's perceptions about others' actual installation of solar and other people's expectations that they should install solar as well. Okay, those are the 3 I'm going to talk about in the most detail. Hopefully I'll go a little quicker here. The other bucket, another bucket is enhanced information. So this is just making, instructions simple, information clear and accessible. This was a big part of the Solarize Connecticut campaign. For example, if in any place there might be multiple residential solar installers, and so even the choice of, which solar installer should I choose is a sort of cost for individuals. So in the Solarize Connecticut campaign, for example, they had one sort of pre-selected solar installer, and that just made it easier for folks to make the decision. Feedback is another kind of behavioral tool that I have trouble applying to residential solar, but this is just giving people feedback about their behavior. Smart meters are probably the best example of that in people's homes that show you, your energy use in every minute or hour. And then a final one that I think is interesting is commitments. And this commitments have to do with people setting goals or implementation intentions. And perhaps most famously, this has been shown to be effective in the domain of voting. So if you get people to make a sort of voting plan saying, when are you going to vote? Where are you going to vote? How are you going to get there? This makes people a lot more likely to vote. And I'm emphasizing this for a reason, which I will now show you. On the x-axis, so I'm going to show another sort of meta-analysis. On the x-axis, I'm showing effect sizes. You don't have to worry what that means if you don't know, but it's just the sort of how effective were these behavioral intervention studies using each of these tools. So on the y-axis are the sort of all of the studies using each of these tools. On the x-axis is how effective were they, and this is across all kinds of behaviors. So now I'm not just talking about residential solar, but all of the sort of climate actions that we're studying. And two things that I want to point out are that, and again, I should say that the dots are equivalent to the sort of size of the evidence base, that is the number of people involved in the studies that we're looking at here. So the top two behavioral tools, there wasn't a huge evidence base for them, so those dots are smaller. Although I think it's interesting, so, and choice architecture is like really small. Commitments, though, I think is interesting because it seems so effective in a lot of places. I don't know of a study of commitments in residential solar, but this is like something that I think is interesting. And if I were designing a study, I would think about how to do that. And then the next point is social norms, which, in all of Ken's work and lots of other work, we see that social norms are a huge motivator of behavior, even in residential solar. So this is something I think is important in this domain. So the takeaway from this is leverage social norms and maybe commitments. And going back to the sort of first part of the second half of my talk, you're all engaged in important and urgent work. Getting people to source their electricity based on renewables is among the most impactful things you can do. So thank you to, and thanks to Liz for mentioning the Applied Cooperation Initiative. If anyone on the call is interested in doing science, I have a sort of collaborator network. So I'd love to work on these issues. The World Resources Institute, and particularly Mindy Hernandez, is fantastic there. She's my contact I'm working with on this project, and the folks at Ker-twang, and you all for your time.